Good morning, live from Nashville, Tennessee. My name's Ashish Parekh, and welcome to another episode of Love Talks with my co-host, Dr. Estera Brilka, who is live with us today from London, England. And today we have a very special guest, a very near and dear friend to both me and Dr. Estera, Mr. Pavel Komarnicki from Berlin, Germany. And now
Hello.
I'd like to turn it over to my co-host, Dr. Estera, who will start asking some questions to Powell as we discuss episode 3 of Love Talks.
Today we are talking about long distance relationships. Thank you very much, Ashish, for your introduction. Long distance relationships are quite funny topic, so to say, because there is lots of people who discourage others from having a long distance relationship for different reasons that we will talk about today. But because of the circumstances that we are having now with the pandemics, with the lockdown, with the COVID, quite a lot of people ended up in long distance relationship, even if they didn't really want to be in that kind of a relationship ever before. And that's because now we can't move that freely as before the lockdown or even before the pandemic. And people who were visiting quite often, for example, their partner who lived in a different state or a neighboring country, now they are kind of stranded at home, but it's not that possible to visit others. And it starts looking that those relationships that were maybe a bit long distance, but people were still able to visit each other and do things together quite often. Now they actually are in a situation when this is no longer possible. And if they want to keep the relationship going, they pretty much find themselves in a situation that they are in a typical classical long distance relationship. So today we wanted to talk a bit about long distance relationships and how they can work and how to make them work, because long distance relationships are possible and there are many people for whom that kind of relationships actually have worked out. So it's not that long distance relationships have no future. It's pretty much also about the partners, their attitudes, different agreements that they make during the relationship being long distance. And that's the topic that we want to explore today. We welcome Pavel. Thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your story.
Hello, I'm really happy to join you for this topic. I hope I will have some interesting input for anybody who is about to enter long distance relationship or is in one.
I used to be in a long distance relationship for a year, many years before. So I guess we could contribute definitely to this topic together. But I'm very interested in your story because, well, I know my story. So I would like to see whether there are different perspectives on long distance relationships too. What about you, Ashish? Have you ever been in a long distance relationship?
Actually, I haven't. But I know, like, one of my friends, he was in a long distance relationship. He was in one part of the States, and his significant other was in the other part of the States. It was all about just communication and just keeping in touch. I think it's hard, especially like if you're someone who enjoys the intimacy, you enjoy just coming home and giving your significant other a hug or a kiss, and then you come home and it's just an empty apartment or empty house and no one's there. I think it makes it harder, and now even with COVID, it makes it even more harder. Be in the same room, let alone 6 feet apart. People who can manage long distance relationships, more power to them. But I definitely think that it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And as you said, communication is quite an important part of those relationships. So that's my first question to Pavel. How to stay in touch with each other when we are miles apart, maybe in different parts of the world even. Sometimes it's a different part of the country if it's so far away that people can't really, be together physically very often. But these days and in the times of COVID, it can be different countries, different states, maybe even different continents. So what's the recipe to stay in touch and how often to communicate, how to be creative in this communication? What is your experience from your long-term relationship? Long-distance relationships.
So a little bit of background information.
Yeah, sure.
When I met my partner, we lived in the same city at the time for like a year or two. And then I had an opportunity to move abroad for work. And I moved to Austria for a year almost. And then I moved entirely to Germany and in 2012, and I stay here until today. We had a little bit of semi-long distance relationship, and then it was like a real long distance relationship. And I think like the basis to communicate is to do it as often as possible without making it very trivial. It's very important to communicate how I feel, how they feel, what is happening in their lives, like sharing some ideas, maybe over communicating a little bit, writing things like, I just had a coffee and it was good, and, things like that.
Like doing things together, sort of, without doing them physically.
Yeah, exactly. And like sending small updates through the day, but not making it trivial. It shouldn't be like sending emojis and things like that, because it gets very old very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. There's no communication really. Emojis are a way of communicating with someone who pretty many people would say you want to get rid of from your life. That's how it quite often happens. The real communication is turning into emojis, and then it dies out by itself quickly.
They are definitely like exclamation point, not the main sentence. And like the ritual that we created was that we were writing in the morning, like, hey, I wake up, how I feel, how are you feeling? Writing about what happened during the night. Maybe I slept bad or I had a dream or something. And then around lunch, like writing again, or like if something happened, and then writing more in the evening. So that was basically like a huge thing that we both learned in the first months. So it wasn't like perfect from the start. It took a little bit of time to fine tune it, find this level that is comfortable for both of us, because I can write a lot. And my partner in the early days tended to be on the lean side of writing, like writing only what is important and more like informing. Now we learned through this a lot. Like now we are living together. So we are no longer in long distance relationship, but it was like 2.5, 3.5 years, depending how you look at it.
That's quite a long time, actually.
So that was really long. And I think the communication pattern and rituals really make or break the relationship, because if you can communicate effectively, like not just getting the message across and like informing somebody, but also keeping them part of your life, because that was the challenge, how to talk about daily life to make somebody else included. So my secret flavor to it is sending a lot of pictures. Now we have these technological means. We have WhatsApp, iMessage, Instagram, and sending things only for the person. So like not sending Instagram that you are like partying, but sending something only for them to make them included, intimate in the message.
To share your private life with them, sort of, right?
Exactly how it should be, right?
Physically next to you, they can't share those moments physically with you.
Exactly. I remember that I was sending pictures of the coffee that I made at one job, because we had a very professional coffee maker. And I learned how to do coffee with many layers and things like that, I still remember these things, it was really cool. And sending pictures from the walks with my dog. And if I saw something in the store, sending it. These were things that normally you could share on Instagram, for example, or Facebook. But I believe that when you are in a long distance relationship, at least half of what you are sending to the world should be private to the other person.
Exactly.
I'm not talking about like nude pictures or something like that. That's like the daily life
things.
Paulo, make sure you send some coffee to me and Estera, because if it's that fancy coffee maker, we both love coffee too.
Yeah,
I have to find this picture.
Coffee maker, so
I managed to make a coffee with 20 layers of milk and coffee. So that was actually amazing. And I did it only like 2 or 3 times. I felt really good about that. Also going and using these modern means of communication.
Exactly, because now it's much easier to have a long distance relationship, because when I had mine, it was 2008 and then a bit of 2009, and we didn't have WhatsApp, we didn't have all those communicators. I remember I used Skype on a daily basis with my at that time partner. But
I
now
used Skype
it's
a lot.
much easier.
Now it's super easy. You can even send, if you have iPhone, you can send pictures which have this 4 seconds of video, and it
Yeah,
provides a
yeah.
lot of content and context to the other person. Like these days, I would say it's easier, but it's also a little bit harder because we are sharing so much with everybody in the world that I feel like sometimes it is your spouse in the long distance relationship is like your biggest Instagram fan. There is no magic because like they
Yeah.
see quite often what everybody else sees. And I think like part of it is to make it very clear that they are included into things that nobody else has access to.
Yeah, that's true. Just to have this private part of life that otherwise
Exactly.
you would have with your partner, well, physically, but because of the
Yeah.
distance, you can't have it. Yeah, that's very true. And I very much like this tip about having some routine, as you said, texting your partner in the morning, asking how they
Yeah.
feel, or when saying good night, or things like that, because it is actually quite important. If you want
Yeah.
someone to be a part of your life, even if you have a long distance relationship, then
Exactly.
that's something that is pretty much like a must, even because otherwise, if your partner was with you, you would do all those things together, right? You would
Yeah.
probably wake up next to them, or at least in the same city, so you could see maybe each other later, or with a long distance between you two, you can't really do it. So you want to somehow compensate for this
Exactly.
distance between you, the physical distance, and try to compensate at least in this mental or emotional distance and make that shorter. Or I remember that, as I said, in 2008 and in 2009 there were not that many communication means as today, because there was no smartphones actually at that point. I think the first smartphone was like 2010 or something like that. So there was not that much communication as it is now. There was well, Instagram, Facebook. It was more like accessible from desktop, at least Facebook at that
Exactly.
time. So it wasn't that much like you couldn't post everything instantly as it is now. So there was still, it was just harder to communicate with people who were somewhere else in the world than you. Okay, within one country it's easier because you can have like package of free talks, mobile, so it's easy.
Yeah.
But if your partner is abroad, mine was in Finland, that's more difficult because you would have to pay quite a lot of money. It's not like WhatsApp now that you call
Yes. It's not
and it's free of
practical.
charge. Yeah, exactly. It's not practical. So I remember, for example, we didn't have that morning or evening routine because of sending text would be quite expensive. But we always, almost every day, or actually every day, we wrote on Skype when I was
Yeah.
at work and I had a break, or when after work. We didn't call each other that often because he was at work. He just had some few minutes to talk, or I could be busy at that time. So it was easier sometimes to use Skype because you can read the message later. That's an important thing. How can you be creative with communication? Because you've mentioned that it's important not to be
Yeah.
trivial, and I fully agree with that.
I think it helps if you can tell a good story or a joke. If you are in a long distance relationship, there will be a lot of dirty talk. Like it will definitely happen because how otherwise you will get all this tension
That's
out.
true. That's true.
And I think it's something that everybody who is in a long distance relationship needs to learn how to actually do it without being silly, like,
Yeah, too
or
silly.
being very vulgar. Because
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
also how to find this
Of
balance,
course.
to make it exciting, but also not very,
To build the tension, but not so
yeah.
overly.
But also how to keep it, because I think like it takes like both partners. It's work on both sides. It's not that one person will sustain it.
It's
And
true. It's
I think we
always
will get back to it
yeah.
later about other topics of long distance relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just like talking about things, like what do you think, what do you feel, and so on, and maybe finding some funny pictures, maybe not very graphic, but like memes.
Memes are always good.
Yeah,
That's true.
that's like a funny aspect of it, that you can really make it exciting, but also not being so opaque, like so literal
Blatant.
about it.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
blatant.
I remember that I used to write silly little riddles or poems, like haikus, kind of, that were funny, something that you would, these corny rhymes that you would send for
Yeah.
Valentine's.
So you were actually
Um,
quite creative.
He
Yes, I
is.
am, and it helps a lot. I think also know how to be creative when when you communicate in a long distance
Mm,
relationship is finding your own language, like, or
true.
creating your own language between you and your spouse. I had a lot of nicknames, and they had silly story behind. They were like
Hmm.
mostly words that I twisted a bit. They were in Polish,
Yeah.
so I cannot translate
Yeah.
them really
Hmm.
into English idiomatic. But I think like making things that nobody else would understand, that's very creative, and
Hmm.
it really puts this, it's like saying things in a very innocent way that nobody else could ever hear. And that's
Oh,
like,
Like it's like
yeah,
super.
inside joke.
it's
Inside
like you're
joke, exactly.
yeah, it's like polish. You're putting your own signature on your creation, which then it's only unique to you, so no one else can copy that.
Exactly.
So this is Paolo's way of expressing himself, and that's just something that
Yeah.
your partner would appreciate, or whoever you're in a relationship with would appreciate, and that's important. So
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about doing things together. And that's another part of the topic today that I want to talk about, because, well, we've already mentioned that it's important to have a routine, to have something which you can call
Yeah.
like your own signature inside joke and things like that.
Exactly.
But what can we actually practically do together when we are miles apart? I have read all those different articles about long distance relationship, and there are different tips about what we can actually do together. I read that we can watch a movie together, for example, at the same time, and talk about it in the meanwhile, for example, when something is happening on the screen. There are other ways of going out and taking your partner for a walk, so to say, yeah, with a call over Zoom or over WhatsApp or any other internet communicators. That's that kind of things to do together. Do you
Hmm.
remember doing anything like that together with your partner?
So I kept it very simple. We only FaceTimed, so like Skype video calls.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't try to do these movies together, or like virtual coffees or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just talked. All these advice are very about logistics, how to complicate your life in a way. But in reality, I think long distance relationship, lack of physical presence is something that we need to also embrace and not work against it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just accepting that, hey, we are in a long distance relationship for a reason. So let's focus actually on using this time productively, like talking, or
Yeah.
even like having a video conference. Like, I usually, when I talked, like when we talked, it was just face to face. I wasn't doing anything else. I was fully present for
Mm-hmm.
chat. Because on the other hand, it gets a little bit boring, and also it really pulls you out. You will never be present doing whatever you're doing if you are also
Mm-hmm.
having to maintain the phone call or video call. It kind of goes back to the idea that I told earlier, that make the communication, not make it trivial. I think when you are trying too hard, like when somebody tries too hard to include the partner in every single action that they take during the day, I think it makes everything a little bit trivial and boring.
Yeah, that's a bit too
And
much,
it
because
doesn't feel
otherwise
special.
you wouldn't really do everything together,
Yeah.
right? People go to work, people are
Yeah,
apart
exactly.
from each other. So yeah, it's probably about, as you said, finding this balance between being trivial and still
Yeah. So
have.
this hour or two of video call every day or every other day was actually something very special, and it was something to celebrate. It never felt boring, and it never felt something trivial to me,
Mhm.
because that was very important at that time, that in this limited time, when you are in the long distance relationship, you also have to live your life, right?
True.
So that means that you have to actually work as a single person. And that's
mm-hmm.
something that we cannot escape. It's something that should be embraced, that, hey,
Yeah.
you are taking good care of yourself, and the other person
Mm-hmm.
takes good care of themselves. And the moment when you convert, when you talk with each other, that should be the primary focus.
Mm-hmm.
There shouldn't be anything else that is distracting you. Because I wouldn't like to watch a movie and also look at the screen and see the other person like looking sideways. That would be really awkward to me.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Maybe I'm old dated when it comes to that, but I would rather like watch the movie and make sure that they watch the movie and then talk about it, just like a normal chat, like part of the conversation.
It depends, on the couple. Some people are probably happy with something like that and others would not. But that brings us to the topic of intimacy, because as you previously mentioned, there would be some dirty talks. And these days, well, it's much easier to be intimate even in a long distance relationship, though on the other hand, there are different issues related to security in internet. And that wasn't exactly about long distance relationships, but with the onset of COVID and the lockdown, there were some articles about how to stay intimate either with your partner or even with people that you can't date in person, but obviously you still want to date online. And here in the British press, there were even articles about Zoom sex parties and things like that. But there is quite a lot of security issues connected to that because it stays somewhere in the servers. So people should be quite conscious about that, I guess. But then what is the way to actually build this intimacy? And of course, intimacy is not only about physical intimacy, it's also about mental intimacy and emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy as well. So I don't know, is there anything that we could recommend maybe to people in that topic?
In general, like I'm a programmer, so I'm a software engineer, so I can tell that if you can use end-to-end encrypted service, use it, definitely, like WhatsApp, but do not send images unless absolutely necessary. Because while the text is encrypted, I never found a clear indication what actually happens to the images. I know that, for example, iMessage on iPhones are also kind of encrypted, so there is like no indication who sent what. But in general, if you can stay in the text, that's like the best thing, because that's also very imagination inducing medium.
And that's why I also asked you, because I know that you are in IT, so you are also an expert here, and well, we want our listeners to listen to people who know what they are talking about.
If you can write about it, definitely most of the current solutions are secure. End-to-end encrypted text messaging, messaging in general is very secure these days, because you have your end, the other person has their end. It's only stored in an encrypted way on the server.
Okay.
I would recommend using Signal or Telegram rather than Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, but still, it's kind of okay. It's kind of okay to use these systems if you have, of course, secure password and everything. Like all these like standard security measures that you would do for your banking app, let's say.
Well, what about like other types of intimacy, right? About this mental connection that we have with our partner. What about that?
Oh, I know for like mental intimacy or just stuff like that. I know like there's some of my friends who are in long distance relationships. They create like an email account just for the both of them to use. They both know the password, and then they just write emails to each other and save it as a draft. And then when the other person reads it, they delete it, and then they write a new draft. And so it's not sent, but it's just in the draft folder at all times.
Okay, that's an interesting thing to do
as well. Not really secure.
No, not secure.
It's actually less secure.
Okay, Pavel doesn't recommend it. Don't do that.
It's not recommended. Actually, email is the worst approach to that. About like the mental intimacy, I already mentioned that creating this routine and includes the other person, making it clear that they are greatly missed, because like nobody wants to go about their life feeling obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little bit where many of the long distance relationships fail, because they try to be relationships, but they act like friendships. And that's like the problem that I see. That also in my relationship, it was a little bit problematic, because when you are starting with that, you have to find a way to move from the daily presence into kind of impersonal aspect of it, because it's always a little bit awkward when you start with long distance relationship.
Yeah,
And
that's true. That's true, because it's also about our expectations. Because when, well, it's much easier probably to be in a long distance relationship when you at some point met your partner in the physical world, and you were dating in a normal way, lived in the same city, for example. And it's also probably completely different if you met your partner online and you've never really had this physical being together at any point of your relationship, because well, many relationships starts when you meet someone, and it doesn't necessarily start as a relationship from the very beginning. It's pretty often it can be about friendship, just communicating for even sometimes months, maybe as friends. And that brings us to another topic, subtopic of this topic, I would say: how to manage expectations in a long distance relationship, and how to set up rules for both partners, for example, regarding exclusivity, or what's acceptable and what is not acceptable. So that's another thing that people who are in a long distance relationship have to think about.
I believe that when you enter the long distance relationship, you should be very honest with yourself. So the expectations should be on both sides. First, you need to understand into what kind of arrangement you are entering, because it feels so much different from normal relationship that you can always see each other every day or every other day without problems. With long distance relationship, it's much more complicated, and your mental state will affect it a lot. And that happened to me. I wasn't really ready for that. I didn't even predict that it could be difficult. It a little bit hit me like a train. I think the expectations should start with a very honest talk.
Yeah.
And I would recommend asking each other, do we do this long distance relationship as a temporary thing because we want to move to the next level and maybe live in the same country, city, flat at some point soon? And what should be the timeline for it? Because
yeah, exactly. That's really important what you just said, because with long distance relationships, it can be either way. Either they progress to the next stage, or they can actually stop at the same stage as the beginning, and then maybe just fade away at some point.
Exactly.
It's all about whether both partners are on the same page, because if one wants something more than just a casual hookup fling through the internet, and the other one wants to have some fun for the time being, then of course it's probably not really good, and it's not really honest. That's quite an important thing that you've just mentioned, to be on the same page. Talk about the expectations.
For me, it was kind of easy because I already knew before the long distance relationship happened that, first of all, I want to live abroad. So I don't want to live in Poland. And the second thing was that we want to, at some point, live together. So that's definitely abroad from Poland. So it was basically just a matter of logistics, finding the timeline, because as a software engineer, I'm more or less flexible when it comes to my work arrangement.
That's true.
And I could live anywhere in the world, especially now working remotely. Nobody even would know if remotely I work from United States or Vietnam or Japan or somewhere in Europe. But my partner didn't have this kind of flexibility because his work is really requiring personal involvement.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit more complicated on this level of logistics. Basically, how it ended up, we knew that it's a temporary thing. So we both worked to make it work. I tried to help also establish the base of operations in Germany. And he also started working on this legal aspect of moving because,
of course,
especially in Europe, some industries require something called Urkunde in Germany, which is a permission to work. You need to get your university degree accepted in the country. We already knew before moving out that Germany is friendly for his industry. I also considered moving to UK, which would be better for me because I speak English and that's very natural to me. But it would be much harder for him to find job here through the legal problems, like the red tape involved. So we kind of settled on Germany, which is also closer to our hometowns.
That's true.
It's very practical because, we, like, even though we moved out, we still have families in Poland. And it also made it very easy to see each other in the first months, because when I lived in Austria, it was much further.
Much farther away. Yeah.
He needed to ride through Czech Republic and then
takes the time.
It takes time. It's 6 to 8 hour ride, I think.
Yeah.
So it's very exhausting. When I moved to Berlin, it's three hours, maybe three and a half. So it's much simpler. So also this kind of expectation setting,
also about visiting each other, how often.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would recommend being very open about the timelines. I know that it sounds very tempting to see each other every weekend, but it's not very pragmatic.
It's not doable, is it?
It's very exhausting for the person who has to travel, and it's not practical in the long run. So I think there needs to be, like in everything, also in the communication, there needs to be a balance and something that works for both sides, but also then understanding, okay, when we see each other, what will we do? Will it be,
to have a plan for this time when you are physically together, so you spend the time as well as possible.
But also being on the same page, if it's like a, let's say, service or hookup visit, or is it something just, living together and having a casual visit?
That's at the foundation of any relationship, really, because we are talking about long distance relationships here. But in some cultures, for example, in the UK, I would say that that kind of clarity is something that doesn't necessarily come when two people start dating, because in the UK, lots of things are treated as a casual thing, really. So I would say that it's about cultural issues, especially if, let's say, the partners are from different countries. Well, you had the partner from the same country as you come from, but I guess there are different issues really involved here about having this awareness what sort of relationship or long distance relationship you are having. And that's another thing that comes to my mind here. It's about exclusivity, because there are couples who have a long distance relationships and they want to be exclusive. And there are that kind of couples that they have a relationship, but it's more like an open relationship. Well, sometimes it's one person who makes it more open than the other. So, it's a difficult topic, really. But I guess it's probably something that also needs to be discussed, right?
Yeah, I think it's a very dangerous topic because, of course, when we are in long distance relationship, we want to think about being exclusive and not dipping the toe into the other pond.
Yeah.
And it's very hard. I have to admit that was a very hard and trying time. It's very messing with your head when you are living far, especially when things start, and most of the time something will start happening that things do not go that well. There is some doubts and there is some stress and the feeling of loneliness. That's very hard, but there's also like no good way to talk about it with a partner, because on one hand you have to talk honestly about, okay, do we want to at some point live together? But on the other hand, you maybe want to start a discussion, but what about we act the other way, like having like some local, let's say, girlfriend or boyfriend. And I think that's it's the hardest part of the long distance relationship, because of course everybody needs this kind of physical contact with other people. And sometimes you could see each other every weekend and still you feel a little bit lonely. But I think talking about that and not giving into temptations because there will be temptations,
Yeah,
especially
exactly.
now with.
It's probably about not putting yourself in that kind of situations when you actually have those temptations and there is a danger that you can actually start cheating on your partner, right?
Yeah.
Mm,
I'm not gonna lie. It's if you do it, if you go this way, it's a lot of regret. It's not the best feeling, even if you lie to yourself that it's because of you are
mm,
so far away. I think it's much better to talk about it, and even like I wouldn't recommend going like open. I would rather treat it like if you want to be with somebody, commit to it. Even if you make some stupid mistakes, it happened. Like everybody makes mistakes, but then talk about it and
mm.
see if you can get over it. Because just as people who live together sometimes cheat,
Oh, yeah.
it will definitely happen
That
in
that
one way or
happens in
another for
many
long distance.
relationships, yeah, and well, the long distance relationship in that case is pretty much, I think, in danger of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's very complicated,
Mm,
and I would say do your best, but also if something happens, because it could happen, just be like honest and have the courage to come clean. That's basically what happens. But if you get over it, it's actually amazing that how further you being honest and transparent can get you when you are finally over the long distance relationship when it ends, because then it's kind of like this joke that your girlfriend or your spouse tells you that, hey, look at this, the other person, like they look nice, right? And
mm,
there will be no awkwardness because your relationship will be so strong and so sturdy after that time that it was worth it to go
mhm.
through this agonizing period
Of being
of
physically separated and being
yeah,
exposed to different temptations that well, maybe are not too
exactly.
good for the relationship. Right, and tell me, what are the biggest challenges of a long distance relationship? Because, okay, well, temptations are probably one thing, and then of course it's up to us whether we want to expose
Yeah,
ourselves to that kind of temptation as well. Because of course it's up to us whether we are going to parties. Well, these days it's pretty
yeah,
difficult because of the COVID, but it's usually about that kind of things, right? You're going to a party or you're going with friends somewhere, you meet other people who
yeah,
are having fun there. So it's also about whether you actually want to often expose yourself to that kind of
yeah.
temptation, a possible dangerous situation. But what are other biggest challenges as you remember from your long distance
For
relationship?
for me, the biggest challenge was the uncertainty, and and it's like on both sides. I wasn't certain how to like what to think about the long distance relationship, and also I wasn't sure when it's gonna end, because that's also a big problem. That if it's supposed to end at some point, how can I be sure that it will happen soon? And it really affects everything.
Mm,
When I I remember when I was like in the worst period of the long distance relationship, when there was like a lot of temptation and a lot of arguing and a lot of the dark clouds. It was all boiling down to the lack of certainty. I wasn't sure, first of all, if this is only temporary or if it's going to end soon, and what will be the outcome of it. And I think that's something that everybody in a long distance relationship should go back to,
mm.
like to remove this, to when we communicate, to make sure that we always communicate what's the master plan for the relationship.
Yeah, but
Also when we
sometimes I guess it can be quite difficult because we don't really know what is going to happen next day or even in an
yeah,
hour or 2 hours, and there can be instances that you have all the good intentions of keeping
yeah,
your long distance relationship as something that is going to be serious or is serious, and you are going to at some point live together, be in the same physical place. But
yeah,
well, unfortunately, sometimes things happen. You can meet someone else who may be better suited for yourself. Maybe there are other issues with work. For example, your partner would not be able to join you as soon as you planned, right? Because, well, we are just planning, and things in life sometimes go completely the other way. So I guess that's about it, isn't it?
Many things happen. And when you are living apart, it's a little bit like having two black boxes communicating. You only get some kind of message from them, and you send some kind of message to them, but you don't know what is happening behind the scenes. And I think
that's true. You can't control anything there, and you sometimes don't have the access to information, right?
Like when somebody lives hundreds of kilometers apart from you, you won't even notice if they start behaving weirdly.
Well, you will notice at some point, but that's usually too late.
But it will be very late. And you won't pay attention to it because the kind of distance will cover it. It will be obscured from the normal life. Like, for example, if you live with somebody and you basically live in the same flat, and they suddenly start coming home 3-4 hours later than normally, that's weird. And then you will probably touch base on that.
Yeah, or having some funny calls in the middle of the night, or trying to go somewhere to a secluded part of the flat or the house to answer the phone. Yeah, that's quite obvious.
And when you are in long distance relationship, you will not even know that something is happening unless it's actually affecting both of you.
Well, you may have a gut feeling at some point, but that's true what you're saying, because people quite often try to disguise things like cheating, or maybe just having another partner on the side, not like a casual cheating, but just having someone else, with, for example, saying that they are busy with their work got so busy that they don't have the time to talk to you in 3 or 4 days. They don't have the time to send you a text, which is quite ridiculous, really, but that's how it works. If you are miles away, you can't really check what is happening. You don't. You are not there. You don't want to accuse your partner of cheating or being not honest with you. But on the other hand, for how long can you maintain this alternate reality and tell yourself and convince yourself that nothing is happening when obviously there is something brewing, right?
Exactly. So I think removing this uncertainty is very important in our long distance relationship.
It's about trust as well, isn't it?
Exactly. Because once lost trust is extremely hard to regain.
That's true.
And like I learned a lot by having a long distance relationship about myself, and also about how to talk and communicate, and how to talk about difficult topics. We are all people, like we are humans, and things happen. But at the end of the day, even if you are in the long distance relationship, you are living not only for yourself, you have the responsibility to the other person, and to be honest and to be respectful. So
yeah, exactly. It's about respect, being honest, having trust.
One advice to whoever is going through it, and I think many people go through long distance relationship these days, thanks to COVID, go into over communication mode. That's the best thing you can do, but make it meaningful. If you have weird thoughts, maybe you are considering making a break or breaking up, talk about it before it really becomes a real
issue.
Before it becomes a situation, then you can talk about it. And if it's the thing to do, then it is what it is then. But I think people go a little bit over the surface, and they don't try to deep into. That's why we have like the ghosting and like different aspects of relationship, which are a little bit toxic. I think one part also of any kind of relationship, not only long distance, is that even though you are in a relationship with somebody and you are exclusive or not, it doesn't mean that you suppressed your instincts. You will still find people attractive. You will still fall in love with people,
You will still feel lonely at times.
Exactly. And I think embracing that, and maybe even communicating that, like, hey, I have a really cute coworker, or or like things like that. I think many of the problems happen because we try to suppress it instead of just mindfully embracing it. Like, hey, I find this person attractive, and there's that. There doesn't have to be more. Maybe there
Exactly.
was more, but then we have to talk about it. That's the yeah,
Exactly,
because
because as you said, maybe it's something that you need to consider discussing with your partner. It's if things are hidden, then they are usually
yeah,
more tempting, and when they are not
exactly.
hidden, when they are out in the open, it's just a thing to just a thing to discuss maybe, and that's how it goes. So that's actually quite important. And
Yeah.
it brings us back pretty much to commitment. When you talk with your partner about the rules of the relationship,
Hmm.
what you expect from each other, that's pretty much, as you said, about having respect to what you've decided on with your partner, and just being respectful for yourself, and respect your partner as well. That's
Exactly.
it's important for every relationship. It's
Yeah,
not only in long distance, but of course, long distance relationship is more
it's
difficult.
special.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
special. Yeah, but now with the COVID circumstances, I guess that for many people it is the reality that they are living in, whether they planned it before or they don't. And who
yeah,
knows how it's going to be further, because the lockdown is not going away for
exactly.
now.
And it's really complicated these days. On the other hand, always think about what's your goal in life, right?
Mm,
Like if you want to live with somebody, in a distance, that's perfectly fine as long as it works for you and the other person.
mm.
Otherwise, consider talking about them.
Make the timeline, even
Exactly.
even with the COVID around, it's not completely impossible to move to a different place.
It is still
So
possible. It's
exactly,
it's it's just harder, like everything is a little bit harder than
it
usual,
is.
but it's
Yeah,
still doable. And I know people who still move abroad, who still,
yeah, definitely.
find new jobs, who switch flats, who travel across
Mm.
the city, and who still meet and go on dates.
Exactly, because our life is not really suspended. I mean, it is in a way suspended because of the lockdown, because of the COVID,
It's
because
slowed
it's
down.
it's not going away anywhere. There are problems with jobs, there are problems with relocating maybe a
Yeah,
bit more than it was before. But relocating to another country is never an easy task,
it's
really.
never easy. It's
So
actually the hardest
yeah,
part.
exactly. So it's maybe a bit more difficult suspending sort of your life and also your
Yeah.
romantic life for, we don't know for now for how long. It's probably not a very good idea either. So
No, it's not.
so probably long distance relationship may be getting more and more popular, at least during the time of
Yeah.
COVID, and then the life will show so how those relationships will develop, or what is
Yeah.
going to happen with them in a, I don't know, 6 month period or period of a year. But for now, I guess this is what we are dealing with in our romantic
Exactly.
life, many of us. So,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Pavel, for sharing your story and your experience when you had a long distance relationship. I hope that the tips that you gave and your insights will be helpful to our listeners. And
Me
if they
too.
are, yeah, and if they are in a situation that they are separated now physically with their partner,
Yeah.
or maybe they just met someone online some time ago and they never had the chance before the lockdown to actually
Exactly.
meet in person, maybe your insights and your experience, and a bit of my experience that I shared too, would be helpful to them and help them take their long distance relationship to the next level.
Thank you
Okay.
very much. That was really cool to share the story and some tips. And if I can give like one bonus tip,
Yeah, please.
if you are today in a long distance relationship, take your phone and write what you would be doing right now with your partner, and don't skimp on any details. Just surprise them, be as corny as you can, because I can guarantee that they really long for it. We are very polite these days, and I think doesn't
Yeah, we
work for
try
long
not to
distance
cross
relationship.
boundaries, but yeah.
Yeah, but with this person, you
Yeah.
actually can, you know,
Yeah,
like it's,
exactly. So yeah,
you
I
know,
think it's a very good tip. Thank you for sharing this one. And to all the listeners, if you want to learn more about relationships, romantic relationships, please follow our podcast. There will be other episodes coming. And thank you very much for today, and see you all
thank you very
soon.
much.
Bye.
Bye bye.